Okay, and then one thing I also wanted to make sure, I think people that have been coming to class know this, but I know online I'm going to have to send out an email because it was not perfectly clear. On the quizzes that you do that are through the self-study tool or whatever that thing's called when you do your quizzes, you can go in there and you can hit grade your quiz as many times as you want. You can just hit the submit button once. So when you go in the top right and it says take my quiz, you go in and take your quiz. In the top right it says grade quiz. Submit, no, bottom.
No, it says submit quiz. It's open right now. It says submit quiz.
Well, submit is what you can only do once.
The grading ones, which is the one down here. The one up here is submit quiz.
Okay, so at the top right, it's yellow, green, okay? So submit quiz will grade it on the top right. The bottom one, submit for grading, you can do one time. So the bottom one. So when you grade it on the top, when it comes back, if you haven't done this, it's going to put it by learning objective. That way you can go back and you can figure out what you did wrong. And then you can go back and do it again. When I go in there, and sometimes it's hard for me to go in and look because the classes are merged in Cengage, to look and say, has that person been coming to class or not? And now I'm starting to get the faces with the names. But when I see a 0 on the quiz and I see they've only taken 1, it's not really a 0 because if you only got a couple right out of 12, it looks percentage-wise as a 0. I look and you only took it once. I got realizing, and then someone emailed me over the weekend, they didn't realize they could take it more than once. So they were just hitting submit for grading. They were not doing the top right button. So you can do that. You can go up there, you can hit it as many times as you want. And the objective of that, I wish I could change the bottom one so you could hit that as many times, but that is not an option I can change. So I can change the top one. I put unlimited times for that. I want you to go in. I want you to go in and see what you're not getting. And that's why I have the quizzes like that instead of a multiple choice 10-question quiz that I used to do where you took it twice, you got your answer, and you were done. I like it coming back and giving you the feedback of what objective so that you can go back and figure it out. And that you're not just taking it twice and being done with it. Because the other thing I like about these quizzes is I kind of want you to go do them first. If you think after tonight, or even if you took them before, that you understand everything about exclusions, go take the quiz. And if you do, and you rock on the quiz, then you do understand everything about exclusions, and then you're doing great, and maybe you can just go do the homework.
I like to take it and see some red personally.
Right, and then you take it and you see some red, and you're like, okay, I got the first 3 learning objectives, but like in last week, I did not get Social Security, and I had several online students that did not get Social Security. And so that would help you when you're going through it's not that I don't understand the whole chapter, it's that I don't understand Social Security, which is one learning objective. And actually, if you go back to chapter 4, it's like 3 paragraphs, right? So, I mean, it's a big 3 paragraphs, so you really do have to understand it. But especially for online students, I want you to be able to go back, and that's one of the things I really liked about those quizzes. So take advantage of them when you're doing it. Yeah.
Speaking of Social Security, I had a question when it came to the test.
Yeah.
So are we going to be given, like, what those floors are?
It's open book.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we talked about it at the beginning.
I didn't memorize all those numbers. Like, I know how to
No,
do it.
no, I don't expect you to, I mean, in tax, it's open book because, I mean, first of all, you're taking it online. So I'm not dumb, all right? You're taking an exam online. Even if I tell you it's closed book, it's not. Now, and like financial, I lock down the browsers and I'm recording their faces. So it's as non-open book as I can make it. But even then, when you're sitting there and you're writing stuff, which I want students to write stuff out in financial, they could still in an online test have something written down that they could glance at quickly, right? They just can't talk to somebody and they can't be turning their head because I can see all that. But they could have notes out in front of them. So I'm not dumb, all right? But this is a tax class. It's no different than fraud. It's no different than nonprofit. You're not going to memorize the stuff, and you're not going to have it memorized if you were working in it. I don't have those formulas memorized. I know what's in them, and I know how they work, and I can tell you it's 1/2 of Social Security, but I don't always remember the 32,000 and the 25,000. I know it's 85% and 50%, but I don't all, so those numbers change. So it's open book.
What do you recommend we lean more towards for the quiz and stuff, final?
When you're studying for the midterm
Yeah.
and final, when you're studying for the midterm and final, it's you make sure you understand the homework. I mean, the exam is going to be multiple choice, so you're going to want to go back and you're going to want to look at the quizzes. But there's going to be a couple problems in there, so you're going to want to go back and look at your homework. Even though I'm not going to put a Becker multiple choice question on the test, I will not do that. All right, those are out there. They're good multiple choice questions to use because it's the same concepts. I'm just not going to use the wording of a Becker test. I mean, those are CPA exam wording. I'm not going to use that. But they're good to do the multiple choice because anytime you do any multiple choice question, it helps you get better and better at multiple choice. And sometimes you miss a multiple choice just because you're not good at taking multiple choice, not because you don't know the content. So do the multiple choice, do the quizzes, and then do the problems that we did as homework. And then any other problems, if you're just sitting there working a problem or going through something that you don't understand, you're going to have a tax problem that's going to be released, a practice problem this week. I said last week I was a week ahead of myself. So I'll release it later this week that you'll be able to look at. You can ask questions about next week. That will be due before the midterm. It will be doing parts of a 1040, yes. It will only be doing stuff that we have done or at least talked about. So it'll have income on it and a couple types of deductions. And that type of stuff, you're not going to be doing a 1040 on your midterm, all right? But anything that's addressed in that would then be game. Huh? You're not going to do a 1040. Because you have to be able to answer questions about it. If it was all just about doing a 1040, then this would be a tax preparer's class. And it's not a tax preparer's class. No, then you need to be taking the tax preparer's class. That was VITA. We're done with VITA. Okay, so this week we're going to be talking about what we're going to exclude. So what are we not going to include in those numbers on the front page of the 1040? So in this one, Paul's a graduate accounting student. All right, he was also an intern this past summer. And the company was pleased with him, so they gave him a bonus. And they agreed, the extra amount was intended to help him pay for graduate expenses. And they also offered him a full-time job starting in December. He got a graduate assistantship that waived his tuition and paid him $400 a month. He's required to teach a class, and then he used the $400 a month for books, room, and board. In November, he was hit by a delivery van, and the delivery van blood alcohol was 12%. He suffered a severe injury, and that delayed his starting date by 3 months. The delivery insurance company settled with those charges, and it kind of lists them out, which we'll talk about later, for a total of $380,000. His mom was with him, but the van did not hit her, but she had emotional distress and received $25,000. Besides being Paul's friend, we're also a senior accountant, and so we are going to try to help him come up with these numbers. All right, so what does exclusion mean? Exclusion is basically anything that's not included in income. So we talked about what is gross income, and income is everything. Well, exclusion is anything that's not included, like these broad definitions. All right. So you can imagine people don't like to include it in, so exclusion to most people is a really broad, right? That doesn't get included. Gifts are not taxable to the person that is getting them, as long as it's voluntary. All right, the transfer is voluntary without any adequate or any type of consideration, and it's made out of affection or respect. It's considered a gift. All right, a gift is not any type of blackmail or any type of you have to do this payment. All right, it's charity. It's any type of thing that's supposed to be done.
But that can be made with love, right?
It has to be. It can be made with love. Exactly. Inheritance are not taxable to the beneficiary. And believe it or not, a lot of people do not know that when they come in to get their taxes done. They do not understand that when they receive money from a loved one that's passed, that they do not have to pay taxes on it. So inheritance are not. However, the income, which we've already talked about, the income made on the inheritance is taxable. All right, so the example, and this is actually one that we kind of already talked about, father gives corporate bonds to the daughter. The bonds themselves are not taxable, but then anything that's earned on interest after that date on the bonds does become taxable. So that's where some people get a little bit, a lot of times they're left their parents' house. The house is valued at $200,000 on the date of death, or you can actually use 6 months after the date of death. They hang on to it for a couple years and then they sell it, thinking they don't have to pay anything on the amount they get from the house, but the house has gone up by $100,000. Well, they just had a gain of $100,000. Now, house is a little different because you can exclude it if they're living in it, but if they weren't living in it, then they can't. So we'll get into houses later, but that's just an example. All right, transfers by employers to employees do not qualify as excludable gifts. So they can be excludable under certain cases, but your employer has to be very careful when they give you a gift. It's not the same thing as your parents saying, like my dad gave us his van, all right? The van was considered nothing because it literally was worth nothing, but it had, 210,000 miles, and it was a 2003, and the only reason he still had it was because it was worth nothing. So when he gifted it to us, it was out of love. It was to my son, who didn't have a car because he kept wrecking cars. So that was a gift. An employer can't do that. An employer can't say, man, Katie, I know it's rough, here's a car. All right? But they can't do that. They do it, but remember how many times you guys have said, but how do they know? Okay, exactly. Yeah.
So if your employer gives you a cash gift of cash for Christmas.
Okay, but it can be excluded under different circumstances. So when they give a holiday gift, and it's not discriminatory, everybody gets it, that can be excluded. It's a holiday gift that everybody gets. Senior management can't get a holiday gift that other people don't get. All right, and it has to be it cannot be a $25,000 holiday gift. Everybody gets a new car. All right, when Oprah, the very first time that Oprah gave a car to everybody in her audience, I don't know if you guys remember that, it's been years ago, but when she first did it, it hit the headlines like Oprah just gave everybody a car. Everybody that got a car had to pay taxes on the car. And even the people that got the car didn't realize they had to pay taxes on the car. All right? It was a gift that was taxable. It was a gift, but it was taxable. All right? So it's like when you go on The Price is Right or any other show. They didn't win it. Oprah gave it to them, but it wasn't a gift I guess it was out of the kindness of her heart, but it was a different kindness of Oprah's heart. So achievement awards can be excluded. So if you're working towards something and it's an achievement award, again, the monetary amount really does come into play. But like I got my 5 and 10 year service award. It's a pin and it's a keychain, so don't be jealous. But sometimes, depending on where you work, it can be a watch. You get 25 years at a place, sometimes you can get a nice watch, and they can be several $100s or even more depending on where you're at. Those can be excluded. And everybody gets them, again. Everybody gets them. Now, this one here, victims of disaster areas, we got another one, down in the Carolinas and Virginia. They're reimbursed by their employers for living expenses or funeral expenses, property damage. Though they can exclude those payments. But it will specifically ask in some of those cases if you're a victim or if you live in a disaster area. So Katrina hit, that was one that spread wide too. That had a very big area that was in. When we had the flooding up here that got all the way up and closed 55, we had disaster areas that you were qualified for different things, and actually you could file your taxes late. And a lot of people took advantage of that one because there was no reason anybody in St. Louis County needed to file their taxes late. But that went down into Jefferson County where they maybe needed to. All right, the employee's death benefit on gifts, the amount paid by the employer to us is excludable. All right, so if you have a death benefit through your work, that is excludable. All right. If descendant had a non-forfeiture, I'm not saying that right, payments, meaning then those would be taxable to the employee. That means that if the descendant, I didn't even say descendant, had a meaning they got the right to the payments regardless, then those would be taxable. So there's different types of death benefits that you can have, but most of them are not taxable. They could also be excluded as a gift if they're paid to the surviving spouse. These are the various reasons. They're derived where no benefit from the payments. Okay, so the key here is the employer cannot benefit. If the employer benefits from death benefits of the employee, then they're taxable. Employer cannot take out a death benefit policy on their own employee. All right, surviving spouse, they perform no services to get it. They have been fully compensated. One of the things you're going to see over the next couple slides is if you're being reimbursed for wages, it's taxable. Even though it's some type of insurance policy, if you're being reimbursed for wages, it's taxable. All right, and then payments are pursuant to board resolution. They're going to be non-taxable. Yeah.
What about the not employees estate? Why is that? The first bullet point or the second bullet point?
Oh, because they have to be paid directly to the surviving spouse or the children. If it goes to an estate, then you're not sure where the death benefits are going to. So death benefits paid through that type of thing have to go directly to the descendants. And if it goes into a state, it can be directed anywhere. So death benefits cannot go into an estate. Okay, so if you go back to this question, he was paid $1,500 compensation for services rather than a gift. If he was paid $1,500 for services, that's going to be considered payment for a job. And therefore, it is going to be included, I just used the wrong word, included in his payment for income. So he would have to, it's not going to be considered a gift. They actually said when they gave it to in the very beginning that this was for services that he rendered. So he needs to be very careful. He could not exclude that as a gift. Now, before you ask me, how are they going to know? It depends on how they paid him. Okay? If they paid him and issued him a 1099, that's how they're going to know. If they paid him cash, then the company's not doing it right. All right, life insurance. It's exempt to the beneficiary if paid solely due to death. There's other ways that you can get life insurance, so that's what we're going to talk about.
Relationship to descendant, not
Determinative. Okay, so the relationship, so you don't have to you can leave life insurance to anybody.
Oh, okay.
All right, if you cancel your life insurance, so you can cancel if you have a whole life insurance policy, you can cancel it usually at any time and receive what's called the cash surrender value. So you then have to recognize a gain for anything that you received beyond the payments that you've made. You would have to recognize that income. If you've lost money, then you don't have to recognize anything. Hopefully you don't lose money on the whole policy. The purpose is to actually have the cash surrender value worth more than what you put in, but you would not have to pay anything above what you put into the policy. All right, accelerated death benefits. That's where you put money in. You're going to recognize gain on the cash surrender or transfer. So this is when, if you know you're terminally ill, you can actually take your benefits before you pass away. And you can use them, but you have to use them on long-term care. So a lot of times the best case scenario to use, you can use them if you're married, but if you're a single person and you have life insurance and you're terminally ill, you cash it out to pay for your illness versus leaving any type of medical debt that could be left for somebody else. But you have to use those benefits for the health care. But there'd be no, because you're using it for health care, you would not have to pay any type of tax on those benefits. All right. This is kind of talking about the same thing when we're talking about cashing it out early for any type of valuable consideration. Anything above what you put into it again. If you cash in any type of life insurance and you get value beyond what you put in, you're going to have to pay tax on it. The whole purpose of life insurance originally was that it's paid out after your passing and the beneficiary doesn't pay tax. Now all these different kind of life insurances that you can cash in early, you can use for good things, like if you need the health care, but then there's all these other reasons you can cash it in. A whole life insurance, I can cash in and use toward higher ed. There's a whole bunch of different things you can do with it. Again, anything above and beyond what you put in then is taxable. And then investments arising from the reinvestment of any life insurance proceeds are going to be taxed. So if I get the life insurance and then I turn around, even if I paid tax on that, but I turn around and put it back in, it's basically not life insurance anymore. It's just income being reinvested. Okay, so scholarships and fellowships, things that you guys might be dealing with, all right? So any type of amount paid to or the benefit of you guys to aid in a degree is non-taxable to the extent that it's used in related education expenses. That does not include at any time room and board. Right? Why? Because you need room and board no matter what you do, even if you're not going to school. That's why room and board is never included. Right? But the rest of the stuff you need. And the rest of the stuff is specific to schooling. So that's why you do not have to pay tax on any of those scholarships or fellowships. All right, qualified tuition waivers or reductions. So if you are benefited from those, so the ones that jump to my head is something like, I was just going to say Perkins, and that's not the right word. I'm drawing a blank. But there's something with the P that students qualify for that reduces. Pell Grant, thank you. Pell Grants, or any grant for that matter now, that will reduce your tuition and you do not have to pay it back. You do not have to pay tax on any of those either. All right, those are waivers or reductions, usually issued by some type of nonprofit. They're excluded. All right, as long as they are towards your tuition. Now, Pell Grants you don't even get. Sometimes there are a few grants out there that you will receive that you're supposed to use. Now, the exception is for graduate teaching and research, which we'll talk about here in a second. So Paul was paid $400 a month for university for his teaching, and that is considered reasonable. He was teaching one class. It's actually considered very low, but he is a grad assistant, so it's a little different. Even though he has an assistantship, he is going to have to include that $400 in his wages because he was working as a grad assistant for those wages. However, the $6,000, the graduate tuition, is not included. Yes.
Well, the 400 is going to be a W-2, right?
He should get it issued on a W-2, yes. But they didn't give that to you in the facts, so they're just making sure you understand that. Okay. But yes, the 400 will be wages, and it should be issued on a W-2. Was that the only thing it said at that point? I guess it was. Okay. I thought they said something. All right, now damages. So now we're going to talk about his little incident with the van. All right, there's 4 different types of damages that you could have. All right, when you have, the taxpayer can ask for loss of income. They can ask for expenses that incurred. You can ask for property destroyed, and you can ask for personal injury. All right, so loss of income usually is going to be taxed as if you worked. I say usually. All right, I don't like to say always or never in accounting. But usually it's going to be taxed like you were working, because if you would have been working, it would have been taxed. All right, expenses incurred, you're usually going to be reimbursed. So therefore, you're not going to include them. If you incurred expenses by going to the hospital, you paid them, you want them to pay you back. So you're not going to be taxed on that money because they're just paying you back. Property destroyed and personal injury are what we're going to be really talking about. So loss of income, like I said, usually going to be taxed the same with an exception. Reimbursement, not income, with this one caveat, unless you deducted it. I'm going to say this now, and then I'm going to say it when we're talking about owning your own business. If you think you are going to be reimbursed for something, do not take it as a deduction. Usually this happens, let's say Paul was hit by this van in September or October, and he doesn't settle until 2019. Don't take these expenses as a deduction in 2018's taxes, because if he gets reimbursed for those expenses in 2019, now he has to claim that as income. And the amount of the expense deduction that he got will not be better. It will be far worse than the income tax he's going to pay on the income. They do not go one for one. You know, getting the deduction equals $1, paying tax on it equals $1 is not the same thing. So if you think you're going to be reimbursed, don't take the deduction. If it ends up that you're not reimbursed, go back and amend your tax return. All right? But don't take it and then have to claim the income. You don't want to have to pay tax on that income. All right. Let's see. All right, damages of property. So property damage is usually treated as if it was like a sale or an exchange. So for example, a car was totaled. Well, if your car was totaled and they had to replace it, then it's a sale or exchange. If you benefited from that, if you got a much nicer car, then technically you gained an income. Is that usually recognized? No, it's not, because usually you just go get a new car. But you also get replacement value. All right, like on our house, we carry insurance on our house, and hopefully you guys do too if you have a house or you have rental insurance. We carry what's called replacement value. If our house burns down, I don't want to go out and replace my 8-year-old carpet or 5-year-old carpet with 8-year-old carpet. I'm going to put in new carpet, but I'm not expecting to have to pay tax on that difference. That's just a side effect of the fact that my house burned down or that carpet got burnt. So some of that's expected in that process. If you're in a car accident and your car is totaled, you end up with a new car. Personal injury is treated as two different cases here. So in personal injury, we have compensatory damages received, which is where you have a physical injury or physical sickness. If you are physically hurt or sick, then the amounts that you receive are not taxed. If the injuries are anything else, then they are called punitive damages and you are taxed. All right, so basically non-physical. So what does that mean? That means your pain and suffering is taxed. So when you hear about some of these astronomical lawsuits sometimes for pain and suffering, they are usually punitive damages. So they are awarded it, but they are going to pay tax on that award. So they're going to get it, but the interesting thing I always find is the government's going to get a big piece of it too. Can't say what the judge is thinking when he does that, but when you are awarded damages for any type of mental distress. Now if you're going to, sometimes they call things soft tissue injuries. I don't know if you've heard of that before. That's where you know something's wrong with your back or your neck. You feel it, but they can't find anything wrong. That's still a physical injury. If you're seeing a chiropractor or a physical therapist or something, that's still a physical injury. Emotional or punitive damages is just the pain and suffering you feel because you witnessed something and you can't get over it. It doesn't mean you're not suffering. You could be in a deep depression. If you're in a really deep one, it might go under compensatory.
Like a PTSD?
That would fall under, that would be compensatory. Yeah. And see, a lot of that is up to the judge's discretion. And a lot of it depends on what it is. You're probably not, for a car accident or that van accident, you're not going to get pain and suffering under compensatory. My guess is when you witness some type of horrible act where they can find someone to blame. I was trying to think of something horrible, but most of the time the things that come to my mind, you can't sue somebody for it. But if you find someone to blame for it, then you can it would probably fall under compensatory. Because then if you're going to have any type of deep depression or something like PTSD, what was it, Agent Orange, when they did come back in the suit, that type of stuff was actually real. And PTSD is it's a physical disorder. It's not just it's not punitive. All right, so wrongfully incarcerated, this came out many years ago. I've been teaching too long. I remember when it came out. So if you're wrongfully incarcerated and you get the back pay or you win, sometimes it's back pay, but then you win in a lawsuit, that is not taxable. All right. And then workman's comp is never taxable. And then there's something called accidental injury and health benefits that you can take out. And I don't know when you guys, though, that have jobs, have ever filled out. I'm always asked this, and then I always get something from the bank about this, and I always check no. And it's one of those things where if you lost a hand, or if you lost a limb, or if you were accidentally killed at work, your spouse could get X amount of money. I always say no. But those benefits received under there by the taxpayer or their spouse are excludable. Even though they are a lot of times wages, because you took out the extra policy specifically for that, they are excludable. It's not a life insurance policy. You're actually taking out a policy for the purpose of covering your wages. So it's different. And you're taking it out on yourself. Your employer is not taking it out on you. I don't even know what they weigh, how much they run. We get something about it all the time, and I'm always just like, I think it's something you'd take if you worked in more of a high risk, I guess just thinking being a teacher, Now tomorrow I'm gonna come in, in a boot or something, I fell on the steps, but it's for accidents and those types of things. Okay, so Paul received awards based on his injury. Those damages he received were compensatory and they were excluded because Paul was hurt. Remember, he had severe injury to his arm. The compensation could even, for the loss of income, in his case, was excluded based on, and I'll have to go back to the beginning, but I remember, based on I think it was the injury that he sustained or the loss that he was out. I have to go back and look at the original slide, which I can when we start, but I can't flip through that fast on this. The punitive damages, however, would be included in his income. Any punitive damage he would. And his mom would have to include hers. Because remember, she was just traumatized by witnessing it. And maybe she actually was. But that was it. Let me think about it. Was he at work when he got hit by the car?
No, he was on the street.
What was
Delayed
the...
his starting date for work by 3 months.
That's right. That's why. That's why his income's included. I knew there was something I triggered in my head. He got to include it because he actually wasn't working yet. So he was reimbursed for income that he could have earned, but he wasn't earning, so therefore it is not taxable. If he actually would have been working, it would have been taxable income. Thank you for having me find it out. 'Cause I can't. Okay. So now we have employee-sponsored accident health plans. This is different than the ones I told you I get flyers in the mail or sent from the bank. So premiums are paid by the employer, and they cover the employee, the spouse, and the dependents. These are never taxable to the employee. So if the event that something is paid, they are never taxable to the employee because they didn't take it out on themselves, and therefore they're not taxable.
The employer gets to write it off.
The employer can, depending on the plan. Right, they get to the premiums. The amounts received from insurance are not taxable when they are received for medical costs or the result of a loss of a body part. Payments for expenses that do not meet code obviously have to be included in income, and any amounts received deducted on prior returns have to be included. That's that whole deduction thing. You got to be very careful when you deduct something on your return. All right, and then this one, HSA. So one way that some companies provide reimbursement for employees is with HSA, health savings accounts. So what employees do is they have what's called a high deductible HSA. They make contributions to the employee's plan. So there's two different types of HSA. And if you've done taxes before or if you have one of these at work, there's ones where employees make contributions for themselves, and there's one where employers make contributions for their employees. Obviously, it's better when your employer makes the contribution. But so the employer in this one contributes to the HSA, and the earnings on the fund are excludable. So the employer puts the money in, the taxes are not paid on the earnings. The contributions are limited to 100% of the deductible amount of the individual's coverage. All right, so, and then monthly deductible amount is limited to either 1/12 or the $3,500 for self-coverage. And then withdrawals from the fund, so you and I can take money out of there as long as we are using it for medical expenses. So the employer is putting money in, and then nothing is taxed to us as long as we are using it for medical expenses.
Isn't it also like health, like deodorant, stuff like that too?
It's not supposed to be.
Oh.
Nope.
I think it doesn't put over-the-counter medication.
Well, on this one, yes. You gotta be very careful because itemized deductions under medical does not. Huh? How would they know? They wouldn't. Okay.
Look at where you use it, I guess.
Now again, remember the burden of proof falls on you if they audit it. But for the most part, a level of reasonableness is in there too.
But like with an HSA, you typically have like a debit card down.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. Yep, it's exactly. I can tell you, and you're going to see it here in a second, I have a flexible spending account. So I can put up to, I don't even know what my limit is because I don't put it in because I'm always scared I'm not going to use it.
Yeah.
But like dependent care, you could put $5,000 in. And then flexible spending for health care, I think you can put like $3,000 or $3,500. It's more than $2,500 because that's what I put, okay? And then every time I use my card, with the exception of a pharmacy, they have required a receipt. So every time I go to the doctor, a copay, I got to send it to them. Same damn I'm recording, same doctor every time. Right now, they've always been, because we have one mail order pharmacy, now this year, for the first time in 4 years, they're requiring a receipt from that pharmacy. So they can require a receipt from anywhere. Eye doctor is the worst, and I just stopped using it at the chiropractor because I just got tired of sending a receipt from there because they kept asking for a more detailed receipt. Yeah.
So the HSA, if there's an administrator that charges fees for investing the amount, is that deductible?
For you, you shouldn't have to have that because this would be through an employer, one that they're paying.
The
Employer. Yeah.
If an individual has it, is it?
If they're charged, it would be a deductible as an investment expense on your Schedule A. I'll show you that when we get to the. Yep.
And I'll ask a question.
Okay. Employer-paid insurance premiums for long-term care are excluded, subject to limitations. So, if your employer pays for annual insurance premiums for long care, they are excluded, meaning you don't have to pay for the fact as a income. You do not have to include that. I don't know a lot of places that do that, but if they do. Exclusion benefits received from the policy is limited to the greater of either 360 days or $360 for each day that you're in care or the actual cost of the care. It's reduced by 1/3 of any other, like if you're getting care from something else. So that's a great perk. I've never worked for a company that paid for long-term care insurance. That is not long-term health insurance. That's long-term care insurance. So that's paying for a facility. Okay? That is. Yeah. So that's a great perk. And I'm trying to think right now of a company that might do that. Maybe if you worked for Delmar Gardens, they'd pay for your long-term care because you're at Delmar Gardens
With
already.
BJC maybe?
You know, I know people that work there, but I've never asked that question. So maybe BJC or Mercy put something in, but that's a nice perk. So I don't know of a company off the top of my head that does that. That's a great one. Okay, meals and lodging. So this perk, now this is, again, there's two ways of some of these look at. This is if the company pays for you to have this. All right, it's not taxable to you and I if furnished by your company on your company's premise. All right, so they bring in the food for the convenience of your company. Well, almost any time your company pays for you to have lunch or dinner or breakfast, it's going to be for their convenience because they're not just that nice, right? So it's for their convenience. In the case of lodging, the employee it's required for your employment. So basically, they're sending you out of town. You have to go, right? You don't get a choice. So therefore, you do not have to pay anything. Now, this one, yeah.
What if we don't have to go?
Okay, somebody has to go, right? And they're asking you to do it.
What if it's like a conference that's related to the field?
That's
It's
still
really
no.
nice to go.
No, I travel all the time now, but let's go back to, because it's a different funding now. When I was at Mallinckrodt, when I was at Reuben Brown, I went to a couple conferences a year. I didn't have to go, but in my field, if I didn't go to some training, I would not be able to keep up to date. And the training, for whatever reason, is almost never offered in St. Louis. So therefore, I didn't have to go, but I would become out of date very fast. So there's a have to that would be in there. So yes, that's covered. Okay, so this was one I knew about. There's another one that I didn't know about. I just started cracking up. So starting in, there's actually two more I didn't know about. So starting next year, in 2018 going forward, the employer may only deduct 50% of those meals. So even though it's at their convenience, they can only deduct 50% of the meals. So all these lunches or dinners or breakfasts that companies provide for the benefit. So like when I was at Reuben Brown, lunch and most dinners, lunch is on Saturdays, and most dinners during tax season were brought in because they did not want you going home because they need you doing taxes. Those will only be deductible at 50% of the cost of the meal. So that's going to change.
Got a huge tax rate.
They're going to have to make a call, right? So, and then after 2025, assuming no changes are made to the tax code, they will not be deducted at all. If the company decides to continue to provide it, they will do it at their own cost, but the employee does not have to include it in their income. So we will not have any change on our taxes, but the company will not be able to deduct it. So that's a big change for them. And let me tell you what, a lot of it's out of the kindness of their heart. A lot of it's out of the fact that they want you to stay there. But the tax deduction's a big part of it too. Don't kid yourself. So that is part of it. So that will be an interesting change. Okay, a couple of the fringe benefits. Now this is not what I was talking about with flexible spending. Dependent care. Some companies will offer a dependent care cost paid for by the employer. So that is going to, what did I do? Oh, let me show you. I brought a couple, because you get tired of, that wasn't the right button, so hold on. If you look on a W-2, slowly. All right, so dependent care benefits can be put on, and on your, what they said, up to $5,000 of care costs can be paid for by an employee, can be excluded. So on line 10, it says dependent care benefits. We can take out of our paycheck money to be put towards benefits. The company can also, up to $5,000 can be paid for. All right, don't confuse the two. This box 10 is money that came out of our paycheck to put towards our dependent care. So that can be children or it could be parents, all right, depending on what, but they have to be our dependents. What they're talking about in this one is the fact that the employer is actually giving us money. And sometimes they have a facility on site. Monsanto, Ralston Purina, they actually have a daycare. All right, so they can provide $5,000 of free daycare, and then they'll have to charge a certain amount, or it'll have to be taxed to you. So you don't get free daycare 100% at those sites. Athletic facilities can be located on the employer's premises, can be excluded. There's no cap on that one. Depends on how nice your facilities are. Reuben Brown had some in their building. It was a nice perk, but it was not a gym. It was like if everybody in the building used it, we would have had a problem because like 4 people couldn't fit in there at the same time. This one's a nice one. When I was at AT&T, I did not take advantage of it. Didn't even think about it. I decided to go to school once I worked for a place that didn't have an educational assistant to get my master's. So they can provide up to $5,250. That has changed. When I was at AT&T, there wasn't a limit like that. And I know people that got their executive masters from WashU while working at AT&T and spent like 3 weeks overseas as part of the executive masters, and it was all paid for by AT&T. Then this cap went into it. It includes tuition, fees, books, supplies. It can be undergraduate. It could be graduate. It's very nice. It does not cover meal, lodging, and transportation. But depending on your executive masters, a lot of times that's lumped into it when you have to go overseas, or anywhere. So that's a great program when you guys look for a job and you're looking for someplace else to work. If you're looking to get your master's, it's always nice to see if they pay for it because that's a huge benefit. This is also another big benefit. AT&T had this one. AT&T was my first job. I didn't realize how good their benefits were until I went to my second job. And I didn't ask about benefits. I mean, I just didn't even ask about them. And it wasn't until I was pregnant that I realized our benefits weren't as good. Luckily, I wasn't taking our health care, but I just didn't realize. I mean, to me, I just got time off to have a baby. Didn't even dawn on me, right? And I had to go out 6 weeks early. And they're like, okay, you start maternity leave. I'm like, what? What do you mean I start maternity leave? I'm not having the baby for 6 weeks. And they're like, I'm like, what do I do once I have the baby? And they're like, well, I have to be vacation. I'm like, so you want me to come back in May with no vacation? And I was going to have to take unpaid time. I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. And so luckily I worked it out with my boss. I worked from home. And so when I had my first kid, I actually took 6 weeks of vacation. Not vacation, of maternity leave. And then I took vacation. But you know, so these are, I mean, it's really important to ask about things that you don't think you need to ask about. Besides healthcare, what other benefits do they have? And adoption, you don't think, maybe it's not going to come across, but adoption, it's limited to $13,810 and it's phased out. From what I understand, I had a friend that adopted a baby. You're lucky if that's like half the cost. So that's a nice benefit. That's not going to cover it. And then healthcare, there's something called cafeteria plans. They allow you to choose between taking the cash and taking the benefits. And basically, it just allows people at different levels to be able to take the health care that benefits them the most. And if they don't need the health care, they actually get to take the cash. And that, a lot of flexibility for individuals. For example, I don't take the health care here, I take my husband's, but we don't have a cafeteria plan. I just don't take the health care. So, this was what I was mentioning with flexible spending plans. So there's usually two types of flexible spending plans, dependent care and health care. Dependent care you can put in, it's my understanding, up to $5,000, at least when I took it. Then you have to submit receipts to get reimbursed. I don't know if they put that on a debit card now, because you usually can pay babysitters a whole bunch of different ways, so I'm not sure my babysitter would have taken a debit card. And then it's a use it or lose it. All right, unlike the HSAs, which wrap around, these are use it or lose it. And then the health care is on a debit card, but you put in X amount and then you can use it for all different types of health care. It is on, it looks like a MasterCard. I have never tried to use it at Walgreens for anything but prescription, so I don't know if I could use it for Tylenol, but I can tell you that I have to submit a receipt for everything, so I would never try to use it for anything else. But I have a son getting his wisdom teeth pulled, so that might just drain the rest of my money that's in there this time. But they do dental work good. They don't like glasses for some reason. They really yell at that one. And just recently they've gone where they will sometimes, they do now go 2.5 months into the next year for the use of the qualified funds, which was nice. All right, so these are employee benefits that are classified as non-taxable. So non-additional costs, qualified discounts, working condition fringes, so basically benefits you get at work. What would those be? Just small things. What are some small benefits you get at work? Free long distance, free computer services, free soft drinks if you work somewhere. At Anheuser-Busch, you get 2 cases of beer a month. You know, those are working condition fringes. De minimis fringe, we talked about dollar amounts. Those could be gift cards you get if you achieve different things. Qualified transportation fringe benefits. Sometimes, depending on where you work, if you take the bus, or if you take the city, or if you take the Metrolink or the L, that's what I'm trying to think of, in Chicago, you get discounted or cheaper fare. All right, so those are the types of things. Parking. Sometimes you can get parking for free. We get parking for free here, but like downtown, if you were a certain level at AT&T, you got to park in the garage. You had to pay for it, but it was cheaper than parking at any other garage you had to pay for if you weren't a certain level. But they didn't have enough parking for everybody. So those type of things. And then different qualified retirement plans. They continue, you have to be offered on a non-discriminatory basis. Parking based on level is not discriminatory if it's offered on the same level based on basically what they're trying to do is it wasn't offered to executives only on that, it was offered based on space. So some things like that are okay. And it occurs at no substantial increase in cost. Employee discounts. So discounts can be offered, but the discount is not on investment property. You can't do that. They have to be on or in the same line of business in which you work. So, for example, my kids can take classes for free here, but I still have to pay the fees and all, like it's not free. I still have to, instead of $110 a credit hour, I'm going to pay $45 for all the administrative fees or whatever it is. That's my discount, all right? I still got to buy the books and I still got to do whatever. But they could not say, well, we're going to be able to hook you up with, I'm trying to think of something, Cardinal tickets for free, or some like weird thing that's off the chart. AT&T. When I worked at AT&T, I got free phone service. I did not get free wireless service, but I got discounted wireless service. And I still get discounted wireless service because I was a past employee. It cannot exceed 20% of the profit on the property or the price. And it cannot, and again, it has to be a benefit that's a non-discriminatory basis. And then non-taxable, if the employee could have deducted the cost of them already. So could I have deducted education for my son if he would have come here and I had to pay for it? Yes. Could I have deducted some of the costs of the phone service for different work and different things? Yes. So some of those things, that's kind of what they're looking at. And then these are some of the small, very impractical things that you might have to pay for if they didn't call them de minimis. Company picnics, those types of things. Company cocktail parties. And a few other ones. This was the one that I didn't know about. So transportation was one of the things that they can use. So you can limit, the limit is $250 a month for taking highway or transit passes that they can deduct per month. And parking is $260 is what they can give as parking per month. Reuben Brown, for example, parking in Clayton's expensive. I think we paid $60 a month, but the parking garage was probably well over $200 and something a month. So that was one of the discounts that we got. But prior to 2018, they used to be able to give a incentive for people to ride bikes. Now, obviously in St. Louis, that probably isn't a thing, but I would think in Chicago and New York and maybe on the West Coast this was. But under the new tax law, this benefit is no longer treated as a fringe benefit. So if they give you the $20 benefit of riding a bike, you're going to have to pay tax on it. That one just cracked me up. I'm sorry. So they can give you the benefit of parking and they can give you a benefit for taking mass transit, but you cannot ride your bike and get a perk for it. Not sure how they singled that one out, but they decided they didn't like that one. So that was the one. So, and then starting in 2018 as well, I can't talk, prohibits employees from deducting qualified fringe benefits provided to employees. So if the employee provides a benefit, they will no longer be able to deduct any of the fringe benefits. So that prohibits employees from deducting all qualified transportation. So the $20 that we were just talking about was a reimbursement. They can't do that at all, and now they can't deduct it. So we'll have to pay tax on the $20, and now they can't deduct anything. So I don't know what's going to happen to parking. I don't know what's going to happen to any incentives to ride mass transit. That one just doesn't make any sense to me. Why in the world would you take away the incentives for companies to not encourage mass transit? But starting 2018, they cannot deduct that. So, all right, so let's take